She was mocked as too fat at the auction until a rancher said, "I've found what I'm looking for." The crowd jeered, dust swirling in the hot sun as a desperate woman stood trembling on the block. Every insult cut deeper until one voice rose above the laughter. A rugged rancher stepped forward, silencing the street with 5 simple words. But his choice wasn't just about dignity. Hidden beneath the soil of his lonely homestead lies the only spring for miles, and powerful men will stop at nothing to take it. Bribes, fire, and betrayal will test them both. She knows how to cook, work, and pray, but can she carry the weight of saving his land and his heart when the law itself is stacked against them? When corruption rides with the railroad and truth hangs on the word of a man the town refuses to hear, will courage and faith be enough to turn shame into triumph? Will the West break them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty livery yard in Sagebrush, Colorado. Wood planks creaked under restless feet as townsfolk gathered for the widow's auction of 18. The air hung heavy with the scent of horse sweat and tobacco, while hushed whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through prairie grass. Zoe Belle Harlan stood rigid beside the auction block, her calloused hands clasped tightly before her. Though her simple brown dress was clean and pressed, she felt stripped bare by the hungry stares and cruel smirks directed her way. She fixed her gaze on a distant point above the crowd, trying to hold on to the dignity her mama had taught her. Next up, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice sharp as a cattle prod. "Widow Harlan, good worker, comes with her own sewing kit." He grabbed Zoe's arm, yanking her onto the wooden platform. The rough handling made her stumble, drawing snickers from the crowd. "Too fat to work," someone shouted from the back. Laughter rippled through the gathering. "Worth more in flour than in labor," another voice called out, triggering fresh guffaws. Heat crawled up Zoe's neck, but she kept her chin level, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The jeers cut deep, echoing the taunts she'd endured since childhood. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The auctioneer's face twisted with impatience. "Come now, gentlemen, who'll start the bidding? She's handy with a needle, can cook up a proper meal." His words dripped with false cheer as he gestured dramatically. "Surely someone needs a good woman to keep house." More laughter answered him. Zoe felt herself shrinking inside, becoming smaller and smaller with each passing moment. The summer heat pressed down like a wool blanket, but ice filled her veins. Lord above, was this to be her fate? To be mocked and rejected, left to whatever harsh mercy the town council might offer. At the edge of the crowd, Sean Reddick stood silent as stone, his weathered face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He'd been watching since the auction began, though few had noticed his presence. His own memories of loss wrapped around him like a shroud, his Sarah taken too soon in childbirth, leaving nothing but an empty house and a heart full of questions for the Almighty. The auctioneer's voice grew desperate. $2. Who'll give me $2 to start?" Someone in the crowd made a rude noise. "Ain't worth the feed she'd eat." Zoe's fingers dug into her palms. She wouldn't break. Oh, she would not. Well, Lord, how it hurt. Then movement caught her eye. A tall figure pushed through the crowd, boots striking the packed earth with purpose. Sean Reddick emerged from the press of bodies, his broad shoulders straight as a fence post. The crowd's laughter died as he approached the auction block, his presence commanding attention without a word. "I'll take her." His voice carried clear and strong across the suddenly quiet yard. "I've found what I'm looking for." The auctioneer blinked, caught off guard by this unexpected turn. "Mr. Reddick, you're bidding." "That's what I said." Sean's tone was firm as iron. "Name your price." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Sean Reddick, the solitary rancher who'd barely spoken 10 words in town since his wife's passing, taking on a widow, and this widow in particular. The auctioneer recovered quickly, sensing a chance for profit. $5 to start, then, done. Sean reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. $10. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. A fine price for a fine. Woman, done. Sean didn't hesitate. Zoe couldn't breathe. She stared at the rancher, trying to read his face, to understand his purpose. His expression gave nothing away, but there was something in his eyes, not pity, not mockery, but something else. Something that made her stand a little straighter. Sold. The auctioneer's hammer crashed down with finality. To Mr. Sean Reddick for $10. The crowd burst into whispers, necks craning as Sean stepped forward to complete the transaction. He counted out the money carefully, then turned to Zoe and offered his arm with simple courtesy. "Ma'am, my wagon's this way." Zoe placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid strength beneath the worn fabric. Her legs trembled as she stepped down from the auction block, but his steady presence helped her keep her footing. She could feel the town's eyes boring into her back as they walked away, could hear the speculation already starting to fly. "Well, I never." Someone hissed, Sean Reddick, of all people. What's he thinking, taking on that one? Maybe he needs someone to help birth his calves. She's wide enough. But Sean's stride never faltered, and his arm remained firm under her hand as they made their way through the parting crowd. Zoe focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing through the tightness in her chest. The sun's rays caught the dust their boots kicked up, turning it to floating gold. They reached his wagon, a solid farm wagon with fresh paint and well-oiled wheels. A pair of strong bay horses stood in the traces, swishing their tails against flies. Sean helped her up onto the wooden seat with the same quiet courtesy he'd shown before, then climbed up beside her as he gathered the reins. Zoe found her voice. At last, "Mr. Reddick." She paused, uncertain how to continue. "Sean," he said, flicking the reins to start the horses moving. "My name's Sean. Sean." She squared her shoulders, needing to know. "Why did you do it? Why did you bid for me?" He was silent for several long moments as the wagon rolled past the last buildings of sagebrush. The only sounds were the creak of harness leather and the steady clop of hooves. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but clear. "Because no person deserves to be treated like that, and because I reckon the Lord puts folks in our path for a reason, even if we don't always see it right away." Zoe's hands twisted in her lap as she absorbed his words. They weren't what she'd expected, but then, nothing about this day had gone as expected. The worst moment of her life had somehow turned into something else. Something she couldn't yet name. The wagon continued down the rutted road, leaving sagebrush and its cruel laughter behind. Ahead lay Sean Reddick's ranch and whatever future awaited there. Zoe didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, she let herself feel the warm breeze on her face and the steady presence of the man beside her. For the first time since the auction began, she could breathe freely again, whatever came next. She had been spared the worst, and maybe, just maybe, the Lord hadn't forgotten her after all. The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward home. The crowd dispersed like scattered leaves, their mocking laughter fading into the dusty evening air. Zoe stood beside Sean's wagon, her hands clasped tightly together, trying to still their trembling. The streets of sagebrush had fallen eerily quiet, save for the curious faces of children peering from behind wagon wheels and hitching posts. Along the boardwalk, shopkeepers began lighting lanterns, their warm glow pushing back the gathering dusk. Sean moved with deliberate care, checking the wagon's traces one final time. Zoe watched him, her stomach knotted with anxiety. She'd seen how men could change once they had possession of something or someone. Would his gentle manner at the auction block turn harsh now that the crowd was gone? But when Sean turned to her, his weathered face held the same quiet dignity she'd glimpsed before. "Ma'am," he said, extending his calloused hand. "Let me help you up." Zoe hesitated for just a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but careful as he steadied her climb onto the wooden seat. The wagon creaked as he settled beside her, gathering the reins in practiced hands. They rolled past the last buildings of sagebrush, the clip-clop of hooves echoing in the stillness. Zoe's mind churned with questions, each step of the horses taking her further from everything familiar. Why had this man spent his hard-earned money on her? What did he expect in return? As if hearing her unspoken thoughts, Sean cleared his throat. "Reckon you're wondering about all this?" he said, his voice low and steady. "Yes," Zoe admitted, grateful he'd broken the silence. "I don't understand why you'd want—" She stopped. Unable to finish, Sean was quiet for a long moment, only the creak of leather and rattle of wheels filling the air. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of long-held grief. "I lost my Sarah 7 years ago. Childbirth took them, both her and our little one." Zoe's heart clenched at the raw pain in his voice. She'd heard whispers about the Reddick widow, but town gossip was a poor measure of true sorrow. "Been alone since then," Sean continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Worked the ranch, kept to myself. But lately," he paused, adjusting his grip on the reins. "Lately, I've been praying for someone strong enough to share both the sorrows and the work. Someone steady." The wagon jolted over a rut, making Zoe grab the seat's edge. "And you think that's me?" she asked, disbelief coloring her words. "I watched you today," Sean said simply. "Saw how you held yourself when they were mocking. Saw dignity where they saw only cruel sport. That takes a special kind of strength." They passed the white-painted church on the outskirts of town, its windows glowing with lamplight. The soft strains of Amazing Grace drifted out into the evening air, carried on a gentle breeze. Zoe closed her eyes, the familiar hymn touching something deep in her soul. "Lord," she whispered, too quietly for Sean to hear, "give me courage for whatever lies ahead." The prairie stretched before them, painted in deepening shades of purple and blue as night settled in. In the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus, their haunting calls echoing across the open land. Sean guided the wagon off the main trail toward a small stream where cottonwoods offered shelter for the night. "We'll camp here," he said, bringing the wagon to a stop. "It's too far to make it to the ranch tonight." Zoe nodded, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. She watched as Sean efficiently unhitched the horses, leading them to drink at the stream before securing them for the night. His movements were sure and practiced, speaking of years spent caring for animals, while Sean gathered wood for a fire. Zoe reached into her small satchel and pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle of bread dough she'd prepared that morning. Before everything had changed, her fingers worked automatically, shaping the dough into flat rounds while Sean coaxed flames from his tinder. Soon the campfire cast a warm circle of light around them, the flames dancing against the gathering darkness. The bread cooked quickly on hot stones at the fire's edge, filling the air with its homey scent. Neither spoke as they shared the simple meal, each lost in their own thoughts about the strange turns life could take. Zoe watched Sean across the fire, trying to read the man who had so unexpectedly become her husband. His face remained mostly in shadow, but she could see how the firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His hands, when he accepted the bread she offered, were strong but gentle. Everything about him spoke of careful consideration rather than hasty action, which made his impulsive purchase of her at the auction all the more puzzling. The coyotes' songs grew closer, then faded again, an eternal chorus of the prairie night. Sparks from the fire rose toward the star-filled sky, brief flashes of light against the velvet darkness. Zoe pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing in with the night. Yet there was something else too, a fragile thread of hope she hardly dared acknowledge. Sean's words about strength and dignity had touched a place in her heart long bruised by cruel words and judgments. He had seen something in her that others had missed, something she herself sometimes forgot was there. The fire crackled, sending up a fresh shower of sparks. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, there was bread and fire and the strange comfort of shared silence beneath a vast prairie sky. Morning light crept over the Colorado foothills, painting the landscape in soft golds and pinks. The wagon wheels creaked beneath them as Sean guided the horses along the winding trail. Zoe sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, watching as the territory changed from open prairie to rolling ranch land. "Just over this rise," Sean said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them since breakfast. The horses climbed steadily, their breathing heavy with effort as they crested the hill. Zoe caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The ranch spread out before them, nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. A weathered clapboard house stood sentinel over the property, its gray boards telling stories of seasons past. To the left, corrals stretched in rough squares, while a small barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded by sun and wind. What caught Zoe's eye most was the spring-fed trough that cut through the property like a lifeline. Even from this distance, she could see the glint of water, precious as silver in this arid land. The morning light caught the ripples, making them dance. Sean guided the wagon down the slope, the wheels leaving twin trails in the dusty earth. As they drew closer, Zoe noticed details that spoke of a place long tended by a solitary hand. Fence posts needed straightening. Weeds grew thick around the house's foundation, and the once cultivated garden plot had surrendered to prairie grass. The wagon rolled to a stop before the house. Sean climbed down first, then turned to help Zoe. His hands were steady and strong as she descended, her boots raising small puffs of dust when they touched the ground. "Let me show you inside," Sean said, reaching for her small carpet bag. He led the way up 3 wooden steps to a covered porch, the boards creaking beneath their weight. The door opened with a protesting groan. Zoe blinked, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness within. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the unwashed windows. The main room held a pot-bellied stove, a rough-hewn table, with 4 chairs and a collection of mismatched furniture that spoke more of utility than comfort. "Kitchen's through here," Sean said, moving ahead of her. The kitchen was simple but serviceable, with a cast-iron cook stove, a dry sink, and cupboards with doors that hung slightly askew. A layer of dust covered everything, thick enough to write in. "Bedrooms down that hall," Sean continued, his voice growing quieter. "There's a spare room too, though it needs some attention." He didn't elaborate, but Zoe understood. Some spaces held memories too tender to disturb. They spent the afternoon settling in, moving with the careful courtesy of strangers thrown together by circumstance. Zoe found herself cataloging tasks: windows to wash, floors to sweep, curtains to hang. Her fingers itched to bring order to the chaos, but she held back, unsure of her place in this man's domain. As evening approached, Zoe took stock of the kitchen's provisions. She found dried beans, cornmeal, and basic staples stored in pottery crocks. It would do for a start. Soon, the kitchen filled with the homey sense of simmering beans and baking. Cornbread. Sean returned from tending the stock just as Zoe was setting the table. They sat across from each other, the length of worn wood between them feeling like a vast distance. Steam rose from their bowls, curling in the lamplight. "There's work ahead," Sean said, breaking a piece of cornbread. "Stock needs tending, Fences want mending. He paused, glancing around the room and the house. He left the sentence unfinished. I understand, Zoe said softly. The task before her seemed enormous, not just restoring a house, but building a home from the ashes of loss. Her heart quailed at the magnitude of it, but her voice remained steady. We'll take it one day at a time. After the dishes were done, Sean went out to check a broken fence rail he'd noticed earlier. Zoe stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his figure move through the gathering dusk. When he disappeared around the barn, she turned back to the quiet house. Taking up the lamp, she moved slowly through the rooms. Her fingers traced the spine of a Bible on a shelf, brushed against a quilt draped over a chair. Each object held echoes of the woman who had lived here before. In the spare room, moonlight filtered through bare windows, illuminating a cradle pushed into a corner. Zoe's throat tightened at the sight. Such a small thing to hold such weight of dreams. She understood loss. Her own life had taught her its bitter lessons. But standing there, surrounded by the remnants of Sean's previous happiness, she felt the magnitude of his grief. The unused cradle, the carefully preserved quilt, the Bible with a ribbon still marking its place. These were more than objects. They were monuments to love and hope interrupted. Outside, Sean drove another nail into the fence rail, the sharp report echoing in the quiet night. He paused in his work, drawn by the warm glow of lamplight moving through the house windows. He watched the light pause here and there, marking Zoe's progress through the rooms. His heart felt strange in his chest, heavy with memory, yet lighter than it had been in years. The lamp's glow settled in what he knew was the spare room. Sean's hands stilled on the hammer. He thought of the cradle there, of the tiny garments, carefully packed away in the trunk beneath the window. For 7 years, he'd kept that room closed, letting dust gather like grief on unused dreams now. Watching the lamplight illuminate the window, Sean felt something shift inside him. Hope. It was a dangerous thing for a man who'd lost as much as he had. Yet there it was, fragile as a spring shoot pushing through winter soil, determined to grow despite the odds. He turned back to his work, the rhythm of hammer on nail steady in the darkness. Inside the house, the lamp continued its quiet journey. 2 souls moving in parallel, each carrying their own burdens, each harboring their own cautious hopes for tomorrow. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sean found Zoe already in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough on the freshly scrubbed table. The sight stopped him in the doorway. It had been years since anyone but him had moved through these rooms with such purpose. We might start with the team today, he said, adjusting his hat. Need to show you the morning routine. Zoe nodded, dusting flour from her hands. Just let me get this rising. At the barn, Sean demonstrated how to check the horses' hooves and brush their coats before harnessing. Zoe listened intently, her eyes following his movements. When it came time to lift the heavy leather harness, Sean stepped forward to help, but Zoe surprised him. She hefted it with steady hands, her movements careful but confident. Done this before? He asked, watching her buckle the straps. Pa had. A team when I was young, she replied, her fingers working surely, before the fever took him and Ma. Sean nodded, understanding loss needed no explanation. They worked in companionable silence, the horses nickering softly as morning light filtered through the barn's dusty windows. Later, as Sean loaded feed sacks onto the wagon, Zoe stepped up without being asked. She gripped each 100-pound sack, muscles straining but determined. Sean watched, impressed by her quiet strength. No complaints, no hesitation, just steady work done well. Reckon you're stronger than you look, he said, offering what he hoped was a kind smile. Zoe paused, her face flushing slightly. Most folks just see what they expect to see, she said softly, then lifted another sack. The morning passed in shared labor. Sean showed her the feed ratios for different stock, which gates needed latching, how to check the water levels in the troughs. Zoe absorbed it all, asking careful questions that showed she was thinking ahead. By midday, they returned to the house. While Sean repaired tack in the yard, Zoe attacked the house's interior with fierce determination. The sounds of her work drifted out through open windows, the scrape of a brush on wooden floors, the splash of water, the thump of rugs being beaten. The afternoon sun was lowering when Sean stepped inside for water. He stopped, struck by the transformation. Floors that had dulled with years of tracked-in dirt now gleamed honey gold. Windows sparkled, letting in streams of clear light. The air smelled of soap and something green herbs, he realized, noticing. Small plants now growing in cups along the windowsill. Found them growing wild by the spring, Zoe explained, following his gaze to the herbs. Thought they might do better here, where they're useful. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving smudges of dirt from where she'd transplanted them. Hope you don't mind. Mind? Sean shook his head. House hasn't looked this alive in years. A small smile touched Zoe's lips, then grew as she glanced toward the kitchen. Stew's almost ready, if you're hungry. They ate by the hearth that evening, bowls balanced on their knees. The stew was rich with vegetables Zoe had found in the root cellar, transformed by herbs and care into something that reminded Sean of comfort. Never thought I'd be sitting here like this, Sean said suddenly, stirring his stew. Used to laugh. At widow auctions, truth be told, thought men who needed them were weak. He stared into his bowl, shame coloring his voice. Pride's a foolish thing. Zoe was quiet for a moment, her spoon pausing. I feared worse than pride, she admitted softly. When they put me up on that block, I thought. She swallowed hard. Well, some men aren't kind to things they buy cheap. Sean's hand tightened. On his bowl, no, he said roughly. They ain't. Their eyes met across the firelight, understanding flowing between them. They'd both judged wrong, both feared wrong. Both found something unexpected instead. The next morning broke cloudy, threatening rain. Sean worked in the barn, sharpening tools that had grown dull with neglect. The rasp of whetstone against metal made a rhythmic sound, almost peaceful. Through the open barn door, he could see Zoe hanging laundry, her movements sure and practiced. Then she began to sing. The hymn floated across the yard, her voice clear and sweet against the gathering clouds. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The familiar words carried on the wind, wrapping around Sean like a forgotten embrace, his hand stilled on the whetstone. How long had it been since music filled these acres? Since any sound of joy echoed across this land. The grief that had been his constant companion these 7 years seemed to loosen its grip, just slightly, just enough to let in a breath of something warmer. When the evening came, bringing with it the first soft drops of rain, they sat together. On the porch, the day's work had left them both weary, but it was a good kind of tired. Crickets chirped in the gathering dusk. A chorus rising from the tall grass dot, Zoe sat in the old rocking chair, her hands busy with mending. Sean leaned against the porch post, whittling a piece of wood without real purpose. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. The peace between them was tender but real. Like a seedling just breaking through soil, fragile yet full of promise. The rain fell harder, bringing with it the sweet smell of wet earth. It drummed on the porch roof, nature's own music replacing Zoe's earlier hymn. Sean watched water drip from the eaves, remembering other nights like this, other hopes. But for the first time in years, the memories didn't cut quite so deep. He glanced at Zoe, noting how the lamplight from inside the house caught golden in her hair. She was nothing like his first wife, where Martha had been bird-bone delicate. Zoe was sturdy and strong. Where Martha had filled silences with bright chatter, Zoe let quiet moments rest undisturbed. Different, yet somehow right for this time. This place, this new chapter. The evening deepened around them, but neither moved to go inside. The cricket song continued its gentle backdrop to their shared solitude. Together, they watched night settle over the ranch, each holding their own thoughts, their own tentative hopes. As tender as new grass after rain, morning sunlight warmed Zoe's shoulders as she pinned sheets to the clothesline, humming softly. The wet cotton snapped in the breeze, fresh and clean. She smiled, taking pride in how the linens would smell of sunshine when dry. These small victories turning Sean's bare house into a proper home gave her satisfaction. The thunder of hoofbeats broke her peaceful routine. 2 riders approached from the east, dust rising behind their horses. Zoe's hands stilled on the laundry basket as she watched them draw near. Their fine clothes and the way they sat their mounts spoke of townfolk, not ranchers. Sean emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His stance shifted subtly, wary, defensive. Zoe recognized Mr. Kincaid, the banker, by his sleek black coat and silver watch chain. The other man, lean and sharp-featured in an expensive suit, was a stranger. "Morning, Reddick," Kincaid called out, reining his horse to a stop. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Brought Mr. Harrison here to have a look at your spread. He represents the railroad's interests in these parts." Sean stepped forward, his boots crunching on gravel. "This is private property," he said evenly. "Didn't invite any surveying today." Zoe moved quietly to the porch, her heart picking up speed. Something in Sean's tone warned of trouble. Harrison dismounted with fluid grace, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "Actually, Mr. Reddick, we have every right to be here. You see, our records show no properly filed water rights for this spring." He gestured toward the burbling water source that fed the ranch's troughs and gardens. "Without documentation, this water, and by extension, this land falls under railroad jurisdiction." Sean's face hardened. "That's not possible. I filed those papers years ago. Did you now?" Kincaid's voice dripped false concern. Strange. No record of it in the county office. Must have been misplaced. He exchanged a knowing look with Harrison. Zoe's fingers gripped the porch railing. The banker's smile reminded her of a snake about to strike. "I want to see those papers," Sean demanded. Reaching for Harrison's documents, the railroad agent pulled them back slightly. "All in good time. For now, we'll just have a look around, survey the boundaries." He turned to remount his horse. "Expect to hear from our lawyers soon." Sean took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "You can't. What?" Kincaid interrupted smoothly. "Can't protect the railroad's legitimate interests?" "I'd be careful, Reddick. Times are changing. Might be wise to consider selling now while you can still get a fair price." The threat hung in the air like gathering storm clouds. Sean stood rigid, watching as the 2 men wheeled their horses and rode toward the spring. Their laughter drifted back on the wind. Zoe hurried down the porch steps, closing the distance between her and Sean. "What can we do?" she asked softly. Sean's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Henry?" he finally said. Henry would remember. "He helped me file those papers. Henry." Sean turned to face her, his expression troubled. "Henry Yazzie, Navajo friend. Best tracker and horseman I ever knew." He ran a hand through his hair. "We worked together years back." Before, his voice trailed off. "Before what?" Zoe prompted gently. "Before the soldiers came." Bitterness edged Sean's words. "Raided his people's camp one night. No warning, no reason. Just following orders, they said." He spat the words. "Henry's family scattered. Some were killed. He swallowed hard. "I should have done something. spoken up. Instead, I just watched. Haven't seen him since. Zoe's heart ached at the shame in his voice. You know where to find him now. Maybe there's a settlement near the old trading post. If he's still alive, still in these parts, Sean squinted at the horizon. But after what happened, don't know if he'd help me. Don't know if I deserve it. They watched as Kincaid and Harrison rode the property line, making notes, measuring distances. The sight of them freely crossing Sean's land made Zoe's stomach clench. Everything they'd built here, her new home, their growing trust, the future they might share, suddenly felt as fragile as a soap bubble. The day stretched long, shadows lengthening as the sun wheeled west. Sean worked with grim intensity, as if physical labor could drive away his worries. Zoe kept busy too, but her thoughts churned like creek water over rocks. Without water rights, they'd lose everything. She'd seen it happen before. Wealthy? Men using paper and law to steal what honest folk had earned with sweat and toil. Evening found them at the kitchen table, barely touching their food. The lamp cast warm light across the clean tablecloth, but neither could find comfort in the domestic scene. Sean's jaw remained tight, his eyes distant as he pushed beans around his plate. Zoe watched him, reading the weight of old guilt in his shoulders, the fear of fresh loss in his face. Slowly, deliberately, she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I won't leave, she said firmly. Sean's head jerked up, surprise breaking through his brooding. Whatever comes, Zoe continued, holding his gaze. Whatever we have to face, I won't leave. We'll find Henry. We'll fight for what's right. Her fingers tightened on his. You're not alone anymore. The lamplight caught something bright in Sean's eyes. His hand turned beneath hers, rough fingers intertwining with her softer ones. He didn't speak, but Zoe felt the tremor that ran through him, saw the way his shoulders straightened slightly. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, hands joined across the table, while outside, crickets sang their evening song. The threat still loomed, but Zoe's quiet strength flowed between them like a current. Steadying them both, Sean looked at their linked hands, then up at Zoe's determined face. The woman he'd rescued from humiliation at the widow's auction now the morning after. Kincaid's visit dawned with renewed purpose. Zoe rose before the sun, determined to make their ranch a fortress of home and heart against whatever threats might come. The kitchen became her battlefield, and bread was her first weapon of choice. She worked methodically, her strong hands kneading the dough with practiced skill. The familiar motions brought comfort: fold, press, turn, repeat. Flour dusted her apron as morning light crept through the windows. Soon, the warm, yeasty smell of rising bread filled the kitchen, drifting out to where Sean mended fences. Sean paused in his work, drawn by the homey scent. Through the window, he watched Zoe shape the dough into neat loaves, her movements sure and peaceful. Something stirred in his memory, his mother's kitchen, Sunday mornings. Hope rising with the bread. While the loaves baked, Zoe turned her attention to the bare windows. She'd brought fabric in her satchel, simple cotton with tiny blue flowers, saved from her own mother's dress. As the morning wore on, her needle flew swift and steady, creating curtains that would soften the harsh light and make the house feel lived in. The sound of boots on the porch announced Sean's return for the midday meal. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the transformation. Fresh curtains stirred in the breeze, filtering sunlight into gentle patterns across the swept floor. The scent of fresh bread wrapped around him like a welcome. Smells like heaven in here, he said softly, removing his hat. Zoe smiled, slicing the still warm bread. My mama always said bread feeds more than the belly, feeds the soul too. They sat together at the table, the fresh bread between them. Sean broke off a piece, studying it thoughtfully. Been a while since anyone baked in this kitchen. Voice grew distant with memory. My ma taught me to ride before I could walk, Seems like used to come in from working cattle, and she'd have bread just like this waiting. Zoe listened, buttering a slice with care. Her quiet attention encouraged him to continue. Saved up 3 years to buy my first proper herd. Sean went on, the words coming easier now. 10 head of longhorns. Weren't much, but they were mine. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Sarah, my first wife, she laughed when she saw them. Said they were the most beautiful, ugly cows she'd ever laid eyes on. His voice caught slightly on Sarah's name, but the memory held more warmth than pain. Zoe's heart ached with understanding. She reached across the table, touching his arm gently. "Tell me about her laugh," she said softly. Sean's eyes grew distant, but not dark. "Like sunshine through leaves," he said, finally. "Made everything brighter." He fell silent, then added quietly, "Haven't thought of that in a long time." Throughout the afternoon, as Zoe worked at making curtains for the bedroom windows, Sean's voice drifted in from where he split wood outside. He spoke of cattle drives and summer storms, of his father's wisdom and his mother's strength. Each story seemed to lighten something in him, as if speaking the memories allowed him to carry them differently. As evening approached, Zoe lit the lamps and began preparing their supper. The routine felt natural now, comfortable. She hummed softly as she worked an old hymn her grandmother had taught her. The melody caught Sean's attention. He stood in the doorway, watching her move about the kitchen. "Used to hear that in church," he said slowly. Before, he trailed off, but Zoe understood. "When did you stop praying?" she asked gently, setting bowls on the table. Sean sank into his chair, his shoulders heavy. "After Sarah died, felt like God turned his back on us." Couldn't find words. "Anymore?" He stared at his hands. "Reckon I'm still angry." Zoe sat across from him, her face soft in the lamplight. "Maybe," she suggested carefully, "he's been waiting for you to come back." Like a father waiting for his child to look up again. Sean's throat worked silently. After a long moment, he whispered, "Wouldn't know where to start." "We could start." Together, Zoe offered. Simple words. "Just thank you for bread and home." Slowly, Sean nodded. They bowed their heads, and Zoe's quiet voice filled the kitchen. "Lord, thank you for this food, for this roof, for bringing us together. Help us remember your faithfulness. Amen." "Amen," Sean echoed, his voice rough but steady after supper. Zoe settled by the fireplace with mending in her lap. The familiar motion of needle and thread soothed her spirit. She began humming again. This time, a lullaby her mother had sung on winter nights. Sean sat at the table, whittling a piece of pine. Wood. The soft scrape of his knife kept time with Zoe's humming. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their wild songs drawing closer to the corrals. But inside, the fire crackled warmly, and the space between them felt comfortable, peaceful, as Zoe worked. She noticed Sean's whittling slow, then stop. She glanced up to find him watching her, his expression thoughtful. The loneliness that had haunted his eyes since she'd first met him seemed less sharp, as if something hard was finally beginning to soften. "What are you making?" she asked, nodding toward the wood in his hands. He looked down at the half-formed shape. "Not sure yet," he admitted. Just letting the wood speak. He turned it in his fingers, studying the grain. "My PA used to say working wood was good medicine for a troubled mind." "Mind?" Zoe smiled, threading her needle again. "Seems to me there's wisdom in that." The fire settled with a soft pop, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the coyote song rose and fell, but their wild voices couldn't touch the peace within these walls. Here, in this space made warm by bread and prayer and quiet company. Something was healing in both their hearts. The decision to find Henry came during breakfast, as Sean watched Zoe knead dough in the pre-dawn kitchen. "We need those water rights." "Papers," he said quietly. And that means finding Henry. Zoe nodded, understanding in her eyes. They packed quickly: cornbread, dried beef, coffee, and blankets. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when Sean helped Zoe onto the wagon seat. She settled her skirts, tucking a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. The wagon wheels creaked as they left the ranch behind. Sean held the reins loosely, guiding the team along the rutted trail. Zoe watched the landscape change. As they traveled, the familiar pastures giving way to wild country. By mid-morning, the foothills rose before them, their slopes dotted with juniper and pine. Those buttes, Zoe breathed, pointing to distant red towers rising against the blue sky. I've never seen anything so beautiful. Sean smiled slightly. Henry's people know every fold of this land. They say the buttes were placed by first man and first woman to mark the sacred boundaries. The first day's travel was slow but steady. As afternoon faded toward evening, Sean guided the wagon off the trail. They made camp in a protected hollow, where twisted cedars offered shelter from the wind. Zoe spread their blankets under canvas, while Sean tended the horses. That night, lying beneath the stars, Zoe listened to the wind's lonely song. "Tell me about Henry," she whispered. Sean was quiet for a long moment. "Met him when I first came out here. He taught me how to read weather signs, find water, handle stock the Navajo way. Became closer than a brother." His voice grew heavy. Then the soldiers came, scattered his people, burned their hogans. I didn't do enough to help." Zoe reached across the darkness, finding his hand. "You're helping now." The second day brought them into rougher country. Sean pointed out an army post on a distant hill, its flag barely visible. "Government keeps tight control," he explained. "Every Navajo has to check in with the Indian agent. Can't leave without permission." By afternoon, they reached the agency. A cluster of weathered buildings surrounded by a wooden fence. 2 soldiers stood guard at the gate, rifles across their chests. They eyed the wagon suspiciously. "State your business," one demanded. "Looking for Henry Yazzie," Sean replied. Evenly, family matter. The soldiers directed them to the agent's office. Inside, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses barely looked up from his papers. When Sean asked about Henry, the agent's lip curled. "Yazzie," he scoffed. "That troublemaker lives out past Black Mesa with the other holdouts. Don't know why we let them stay there." He waved them away, already forgotten. Zoe's hands tightened in her lap, but she held her tongue. Sean's jaw was set as they drove away from the agency, following the agent's grudging directions. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally spotted smoke from cooking fires. The Navajo camp spread along a shallow valley. Sheep grazing on the sparse grass. Children stopped their play to watch the wagon approach. Women paused in their weaving, expressions guarded. An old man rose from his rest by a hogan, pointing them toward a dwelling set apart from the others. They found Henry sitting outside, his hogan mending a bridle. Age had weathered his face, and grief had left its mark, but his hands were still strong and sure. He looked up as the wagon stopped, his dark eyes revealing nothing. Sean climbed down slowly, helping Zoe from the seat. "Brother," he said softly in greeting. Henry's expression remained stern, but something flickered in his eyes at the old word. He set aside his work, studying them both. Zoe stepped forward, offering a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I made cornbread this morning," she said quietly. "And there's coffee, if you'd care to share it." Henry's gaze moved from the bundle to her face, measuring. After a long moment, he nodded. "The evening is cool. A fire would be welcome." As darkness gathered, they sat around Henry's cook fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the hogan's walls while coffee simmered in a battered pot. Zoe served the cornbread on a clean cloth, careful to show respect in her movements. Sean spoke then. explaining about Kincaid and the railroad's claim. Henry listened in silence, occasionally nodding. When Sean finished, the old scout studied the fire. "I remember those papers," he said finally. "We filed them together. Before, he didn't need to finish. They all knew what had happened after. I can testify to what we did. But the town may not accept a Navajo's word. They'll have to," Sean said firmly. "It's the truth." Henry's eyes crinkled slightly. "Truth is not always enough, my friend." But he looked at Zoe, who met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps things can change." The fire crackled, sending sparks toward the star-filled sky. Zoe poured more coffee, the fragrant steam rising like prayers. Around them, the camp settled into night sounds, sheep bleating softly, children's voices drifting from nearby hogans, an old woman singing a blessing song. Henry accepted the cup Zoe offered, his movements deliberate. "You have chosen well," he told Sean quietly. "She has a good heart." Zoe felt warmth rise in her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "Thank you for trusting us with your help." The old scout nodded, something softening in his weathered face. Trust, like water, is precious. In this land, we must protect what matters. They talked late into the night, their voices low and earnest. The fire burned down to coals, but the warmth between them grew stronger. Zoe felt it, a bridge being built, span by span, across years of pain and silence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Morning came gently to the Navajo camp. The sun's first rays painted the hogans in gold, while sheep stirred in their night pens. Zoe woke early, helping Henry's sister prepare blue corn mush over the cooking fire. The aroma drew others to gather, including Sean, who accepted a tin. Cup of coffee with quiet thanks, Henry sat cross-legged near the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. Steam rose from his cup as he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "It was spring, 5 years past," he said. "The corn was just sprouting, and the lambs were strong." His hands tightened around his cup. The soldiers came at dawn. No warning, no cause, just orders to clear the land. Zoe's heart ached as Henry described that terrible morning. The chaos as mothers grabbed children, elders struggling to gather what they could. The crack of flames as hogans burned, generations of crafted beauty turned to ash. Sheep scattered into the hills, while soldiers drove families toward the agency grounds. My wife, Henry's voice caught. She was heavy with child. The long walk was too much. He fell silent, the weight of loss heavy in the morning air. Sean's face had grown pale. His hands trembled as he set down his coffee. "I heard the shots that morning," he admitted. "Saw the smoke, but he swallowed hard. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I couldn't interfere with army orders." The silence stretched, broken only by the pop of burning wood. Henry studied his old friend's face, seeing the shame. "Written there, I should have helped," Sean whispered. "Should have done something, anything." Zoe moved then, settling beside them both. Her soft-figured form seemed to gather their pain, holding it gently. "The past flows like water," she said quietly. "We cannot hold it back, but we can choose where to plant new seeds." Henry's weathered face softened at her words. "Your woman speaks wisdom, my friend." "The strength to begin again," Zoe continued, her voice steady. "That is what matters now. Together, we can face what comes." Henry nodded slowly. "I will testify about the water rights. The papers we filed were proper and true." His expression grew grave. "But the town's hearts are hard. They see only what they wish to see." "Then we'll help them see differently," Zoe said firmly. They broke camp as the sun climbed higher. Henry's sister pressed a bundle of fresh flatbread into Zoe's hands while children waved shyly from doorways. The wagon creaked as they started their journey. Home, Henry, riding beside them on his paint pony. The return trip felt different, charged with both tension and hope. They passed through vast plains of sage, its bittersweet scent rising in the heat. Hawks wheeled overhead, their shadows racing across the empty land. At night, they made camp in sheltered places, always alert for other travelers. Zoe's cooking worked small miracles during those nights on the trail. She turned simple ingredients into meals that brought comfort. Beans simmered with dried chilies, cornbread baked in the Dutch oven, wild onions gathered along the way. The food seemed to ease the strain between the men, drawing out quiet stories and even occasional laughter. Sean's chuckle, when it first emerged, startled them all. Henry had been describing a time when young Sean tried to rope a particularly clever cow, only to end up face down in a mud hole. The sound of Sean's laughter, rusty but real, made Zoe's heart lift. She caught Henry's eye across the fire and saw understanding there. Healing had begun. Their third day of travel brought them within sight of home. The afternoon sun slanted across the ranch buildings, making them glow. Zoe felt a surge of pride at the neat yard, the garden she'd started, the curtains bright in windows that had once been bare. Sean helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers. "Welcome home," he said softly, including Henry in his glance. Henry dismounted, leading his horse to water. He moved carefully, watching how things had changed since he'd last visited. His eyes noted the new fence rails, the swept porch, the herbs drying under the eaves. "You must stay," Zoe insisted, already planning supper. "The day is late, and the road to town is long." A shadow crossed Henry's face at mention of the town, but he nodded. "Your hospitality honors me." While Sean and Henry tended to the stock, Zoe bustled in her kitchen. She had been saving ingredients for a special meal, a chicken from her small flock. Dried apple pie, the last of her precious coffee. Her hands moved surely as she worked, adding pinches of herbs, testing the cornbread with a straw. The men came in as sunset painted the sky. They had washed up at the pump, their faces clean but weary. Zoe had set the table with her best cloth, 3 plates arranged with care. A lamp burned cheerfully on the sideboard, and the room smelled of good food and welcome. They sat together. This unlikely family. Henry offered a blessing in his own tongue, the strange, beautiful words filling the kitchen. Sean bowed his head, and Zoe saw his lips move in his own quiet prayer. The meal began quietly, but soon conversation flowed. Henry praised Zoe's cooking, telling her how his mother had used similar herbs. Sean spoke of cattle prices and rain signs, including Henry naturally in his plans. Zoe shared her hopes for expanding the garden, maybe adding beehives come spring. Laughter grew easier as the evening deepened. The lamp cast warm circles of light as they lingered over pie, telling stories and sharing memories. Zoe watched the men's faces soften, years of distance melting away. She saw how Sean's shoulders had relaxed, how Henry's eyes had lost their wariness in that gentle moment. She understood what was happening. This was more than a meal, more than hospitality. This was family being born, not from blood or duty, but from choice and trust and hope. Different than any of them had expected. Yet somehow, right and whole, Sean caught her eye across the table, and his smile held all the warmth of summer. Henry's quiet chuckle blended with the crickets singing outside. The kitchen glowed with something deeper than lamplight, something that felt like belonging. They were 3 people from different worlds, brought together by need and circumstance. But around that table, sharing food and stories beneath the vast western sky, they had found something precious. They had found home. The morning sun painted long shadows across the ranch yard as Zoe sorted through her sewing basket. Her fingers traced the neat rows of pins, threads, and carefully hoarded fabric scraps she had brought from her old life. A bolt of sturdy brown cotton lay across her lap, purchased months ago in town. She had been saving it for something special, now measuring. The cloth against Henry's worn shirt, she knew its purpose. Their friend needed proper clothes for the hearing, something that would command respect from townfolk who judged too quickly by appearance. Henry stood patiently as she took measurements, his expression touched with both gratitude and discomfort at being fussed over. "This is not necessary," he said softly. "It is," Zoe replied, marking the fabric with chalk. "A man should face important days wearing dignity." Her gentle smile took any sting from the words. Through the open window came the steady rhythm of hammering. Sean and Henry had been mending fences since dawn, their work punctuated by comfortable silence and occasional shared memories. The sound of their labor filled Zoe with contentment. This was how a home should feel alive with purpose and care. She worked steadily through the morning, the treadle sewing machine humming beneath her feet. The shirt took shape, sturdy seams, careful buttonholes, a proper collar. She remembered the jeers at her size during the auction, how clothes had been used to shame her. This gift to Henry felt like an answer to those cruel voices. Outside, the men paused for water at the pump. Sean splashed his face, dusty from fence work. "Remember that spring roundup," he said to Henry, "when that ornery red heifer led us clear to Devil's Canyon?" Henry's laugh was quiet but genuine. 3 days tracking her. "You were sure she had devil's horns. Well, she nearly put them through me." Sean grinned, the expression erasing years from his weathered face. Zoe listened to their easy banter as she pressed seams flat with her iron. The friendship between the men was healing, like a broken bone finally setting straight. Their shared work had rebuilt trust that words alone could not mend. By afternoon, her garden called. Zoe set aside her sewing and walked the neat rows she had planted. Tomatoes ripened on the vine, beans climbed their poles, and herbs scented the air. She hummed an old hymn while she worked, her heart light despite the challenges ahead. The garden had become her pride, proof that beauty could grow from bare earth. Like her marriage to Sean, like their unexpected family with Henry. Life could flourish in unlikely soil when tended with patience and faith. The sun was lowering when dust rose on the road. Sean straightened from his work, shading his eyes. "Preacher's coming," he called. Reverend Matthews drove his buggy into the yard, his kind face creased with purpose. He had been one of the few to treat Henry with respect in town, speaking against prejudice from his pulpit. "Evening, folks," he said, climbing down. His eyes took in the neat yard, the fresh-swept porch, the way the three of them had gathered naturally to greet him. "I've come about the hearing." They settled in the kitchen, where Zoe poured coffee into her best cups. The preacher's presence filled the room with quiet authority as he spoke. "The town council needs to hear truth," he said firmly. "Henry's testimony about those water rights could change hearts if they'll listen." He looked at Sean. "Your word carries weight to friend. Together, you might overcome their blindness." Henry sat straight in his chair, dignity in every line. "I will speak what I know is true," he said. "The papers we filed were proper. The spring rights belong here, not to railroad men who never worked this land." The preacher nodded, then bowed his head. "Shall we pray together?" They joined hands around the table-weathered ranch hands, soft working fingers, ones marked by years of frontier life. The preacher's voice rose and fell, asking for wisdom, justice, and open hearts. Zoe felt strength flow through that circle of joined hands. Here was the answer to the auctioneer's hammer: 2 burning hogans, 2 greed that would steal land and water. Here was family, chosen and true. Evening settled over the ranch as they shared a simple supper. Henry had insisted on contributing, preparing lamb stew in the way of his people. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, drawing appreciative murmurs from Sean. "Better than my trail cooking," he admitted, reaching for seconds. Henry's eyes crinkled. "That would not be difficult, my friend. I remember your beans." Now, those beans kept us alive that winter of 1873. Sean protested, but he was grinning. Zoe laughed freely at their teasing, the sound bright as spring water. How far they had come from those first awkward days after the auction. Her shame from that time felt distant now, replaced by belonging. After supper, they carried cups of coffee out to the porch. Stars were beginning to pepper the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. They sat in comfortable silence, three people bound by choice and trust. Henry pointed to a bright star rising in the east. He spoke its name in his language, then translated. "The Coyote Star," he said. "My grandfather taught that it guides travelers home. Seems it guided you here," Zoe said softly. Sean's hand found hers in the gathering dark. "Home," he repeated. And the word held all their hope for tomorrow. They sat together beneath the vast sky, listening to night sounds rising from the land. No one spoke of the hearing directly, but confidence flowed between them like a quiet stream. Whatever came, they would face it as family. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, ancient and patient. On the porch of a ranch house that had known both sorrow and joy, three people whose lives had been shaped by loss and prejudice found themselves looking forward with quiet strength. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight was for peace, for gentle laughter, for the simple blessing of belonging. Thunder grumbled in the distance as evening settled over the ranch. Zoe stood at the kitchen window, watching purple clouds mass on the horizon. The air felt heavy, warning of rain to come. Inside, warmth from the cooking stove and the scent of fresh cornbread wrapped around them like a quilt. Sean paced near the fireplace, rehearsing what he would say at tomorrow's hearing. The deed papers lay in his old leather satchel, placed carefully on the mantel. Those yellowed documents held their future proof of water rights filed years ago, bearing both his signature and Henry's witness mark. The spring was registered. "Proper," Sean muttered, running fingers through his hair. "We did everything by law." Henry sat at the kitchen table, his new shirt crisp and ready for morning. "The truth will stand," he said quietly, "even against men like Kincaid." Zoe moved to pour more coffee, but a sound caught her attention: hoofbeats approaching through the gathering dusk. Sean tensed, hand moving toward his rifle. "Just checking the stock before this storm hits," Deputy Harris called out as he rode past the house. His voice was too cheerful, his wave too friendly. Something about his presence sent a chill down Zoe's spine. They watched until he disappeared around the barn. Henry's expression grew troubled. "That man never brought good news," he said softly. Lightning flickered in the distance as they finished their evening meal. The air grew thick with coming rain. Sean stepped out to close up the chicken coop, while Henry moved to the barn to check his horse. Zoe was washing dishes when she first smelled the smoke. Fire. Henry's shout cut through the evening quiet. "The barn." Sean burst through the door. Face pale, the satchelee moved it to the barn this afternoon. They ran through the yard, where angry orange light flickered behind barn doors. Smoke poured through the cracks. Sean yanked the doors wide, letting in a rush of wind that fed the flames. The fire had started in the corner where Sean stored tools and papers. The leather satchel was already engulfed, documents curling to ash in the heat. Sean lunged forward, but Henry grabbed his arm. "Too late," Henry said grimly. "Save the horses first." They worked frantically in the thickening smoke. Zoe helped lead the frightened animals out while Sean and Henry fought the flames with blankets and buckets. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, helping their efforts. When the fire was finally out, Sean stood staring at the scorched corner. His hands were trembling as he knelt to sift through the ashes. Nothing remained of the satchel but scattered bits of leather and char. "No," he whispered. Then louder. "No." His fist slammed against the barn wall. Damn them. Damn that deputy and his master. Zoe moved to embrace him, to offer comfort, but Sean jerked away. His face was a mask of anguish and fury. Without a word, he stormed out into the rain. Henry touched the burned wall gently. This was no accident. Harris knew what he sought. "What can we do?" Zoe asked, her voice small against the drumming rain. "Without those papers, the court will dismiss our claim." Henry's words fell like stones. Kincaid knows this. Why he acted now, on the eve of our hearing. Zoe felt the weight of months of hope crumbling. The home she had built here, the family they had forged, all balanced on the edge of ruin. She thought of Kincaid's smug face, of Deputy Harris's false cheerfulness, and anger rose to match her fear. There must be something, she insisted. Some way to prove. Thunder crashed overhead, drowning her words. Henry shook his head slowly. "Without documents, it becomes only words. My word against theirs." His bitter smile spoke volumes. About how such contests usually ended. They secured the barn as best they could in the downpour. The animals were safe, but the air still carried the acrid scent of burned paper and destroyed dreams. Zoe's skirts were soaked by the time they returned to the house. Sean was not inside. Through the window, she could see him sitting on the porch. Steps, head bowed against the rain. He had faced loss before his first wife. Years of loneliness, but this defeat seemed to have broken something in him. "Go to him," Henry advised quietly. "He needs you, even if he cannot say it." But when? Zoe stepped onto the porch. Sean would not meet her eyes. "Leave me be," he said roughly. "I've failed you. Failed us all. You haven't failed." She started, but he cut her off. "I should never have moved those papers. Should have seen this coming. Now everything we've built," his voice cracked. "You should go, Zoe, before you lose what little you have left." The words stung like a slap. Zoe stood for a long moment, rain dripping from the porch roof, then turned and went inside. Her throat ached with unshed tears. The house felt hollow now, hope seeping away like water through sand. Henry had settled in the front room, his usual calm facade showing cracks of worry. Neither of them spoke as the evening grew later. Finally, Henry retired to the spare room, leaving a lamp burning. Zoe climbed the stairs to her bedroom, but sleep would not come. She lay awake, listening to the rain pattern on the roof, feeling the fragments of her world sliding apart. Below, she could hear Sean in the darkened kitchen. The scrape of his chair, the thunk of his boots as he paced. Once, she thought she heard a sob, but it might have been the wind. Zoe pulled her quilt tighter, remembering the widow's auction where this journey began. She had survived shame then, found strength she didn't know she had. But this pain was deeper, because now she had so much more to lose: love, family, belonging. The rain continued falling, washing away the smoke smell, but it could not cleanse the fear that gripped them all. Tomorrow's hearing loomed like a shadow. And without those precious papers, they had no shield against Kincaid's greed. In the kitchen, Sean sat with his head in his hands, destroyed by failure. Upstairs, Zoe stared into darkness, fighting tears. And somewhere between them, hope flickered like a candle in a storm. Desperate to keep burning, morning crept over the Colorado foothills, pale and cheerless. The storm had passed, leaving puddles in the yard and a heavy dampness that clung to everything. Smoke damage had left black streaks up the barn's weathered boards, a stark reminder of last night's treachery. Zoe stood at the cast iron stove, mechanically stirring a pot of oatmeal. The familiar motions brought no comfort today. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the scent of cinnamon. She had a touch of warmth on this cold morning. But her mind kept returning to the destroyed papers, to Sean's broken expression in the rain. Henry appeared in the kitchen doorway, his new shirt wrinkled from a sleepless night. His usual dignified bearing seemed weighted down. He paced the worn floorboards, boots making hollow sounds against the wood. No white court will hear. A Navajo man's word alone, he muttered, shaking his head. They will say I lie, that I am not to be trusted. His voice held decades of bitter experience. Sean sat at the table, staring into nothing. When Zoe placed a bowl before him, he pushed it away without looking up. No use, he said, voice rough from lack of sleep. It's all lost now. The spring, the ranch, everything. His shoulders sagged with defeat. We cannot fight them without proof. The familiar ache of worthlessness crept over Zoe like a shadow. She recognized this feeling, the same helplessness that had gripped her at the widow's auction. The jeers of the crowd echoed in her memory. Too fat, too plain, unwanted. Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of a chair. I need some air, she whispered, though neither man seemed to hear. Outside, the morning sun had begun to warm the damp earth. Zoe's skirts brushed against the herbs she had planted along the path, tender shoots of sage, mint, and rosemary reaching toward the light. She knelt in the soft dirt, touching a tiny leaf with gentle fingers. These plants had seemed so fragile when she first put them in the ground. Yet they had taken root, growing stronger each day. Like her hopes for this place, like the family they were becoming, tears spilled down her cheeks, dropping onto the dark soil. Her chest felt tight with grief for all they stood to lose. But something else stirred beneath the pain, of fierce determination she had not known. She possessed. Zoe raised her face to the sky, words spilling from her heart. Lord, give me courage, she prayed aloud. Make me what Sean needs. Help me be strong enough for all of us. The morning breeze touched her wet cheeks like a gentle hand. She drew a deep breath, then another, the scent of damp earth and growing. Things filled her lungs. Rising slowly, Zoe brushed the dirt from her skirts. She dried her tears with steady hands, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the house. Sean and Henry had not moved. The untouched bowls of oatmeal had grown cold, forgotten in their despair. But something had changed in Zoe's bearing as she stood in the doorway. We are going to that hearing, she said firmly. Sean looked up, startled by the steel in her voice. Zoe, there's no point. Without those papers, we will tell the truth, she cut him off. All of us. Together. Henry stopped pacing. They will not listen, he began. Then we will make them listen. Zoe's quiet words carried an unmovable weight. I will not let them steal our home without a fight, and neither should you. She moved to stand before Sean, meeting his gaze directly. You gave me dignity when others saw only shame. You offered me a home when I had nothing. Now I'm asking you to stand with me, even if we lose. Something flickered in Sean's tired eyes, a spark of the strength she knew lived in him. He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Henry, Zoe turned to their friend. Your word may not be enough for them, but it means everything to us. Will you stand with us too? Henry studied her face, seeing past the soft curves that others had mocked to the warrior spirit beneath. His lips curved in a small smile. I will stand, he said simply. Zoe felt warmth spread through her chest, melting the last traces of old shame. Then let's eat, she said, moving to reheat the oatmeal. We'll need our strength today. As she stirred the pot, she heard Sean's chair scrape back. His hand touched her shoulder gently. I'm sorry, he said softly, for giving up, for telling. You two leave. Zoe covered his hand with hers. We're family now, she replied. All of us. And family stands together. The morning sun streamed through the window, touching their joined hands with gold. Outside, the herbs reached toward the light, growing stronger. Inside, hope began to kindle once more. They ate quickly, knowing the hearing would start soon. The oatmeal was not quite hot, the coffee slightly bitter, but none of them noticed. Their minds were on the battle ahead as they prepared to leave. Zoe looked around the home she had made, here the clean curtains, the swept floors, the fresh bread cooling on the rack. She refused to believe this would be the last time she saw it. Ready? Sean asked from the doorway, his voice steadier now. Zoe nodded, drawing strength from his presence, from Henry's quiet dignity, from her own newfound courage. Together they stepped out into the morning light, ready to face whatever came. They had no papers, no proof but their words and their truth. But they had something stronger. They had each other, and for Zoe, that was enough to stand on. The meeting hall buzzed with tension as townsfolk filed in, filling wooden benches and leaning against whitewashed walls. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the rough-planked floor. The air felt thick with whispers and sidelong glances at the front table. Mr. Kincaid lounged in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. His perfect black suit and polished boots gleamed in stark contrast to the working clothes of those around him. The railroad agent sat beside him, shuffling papers with practiced importance. Judge Harrison, his gray beard neatly trimmed, called the room to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Water rights dispute, the judge announced. Railroad claim versus Reddick Ranch. Sean stepped forward, his shoulders squared despite the wariness in his stance. His voice carried clear and strong through the hall as he described the spring that gave life to his land. That water's flowed there since before I came, he said. We dug it proper, filed it legal. Henry Yazzie helped me do both. At Henry's name, a ripple of mutters swept the crowd. The Navajo man rose slowly from his seat, dignity in every movement. His clean-sewn shirt stood out among the townspeople, who drew back as he passed. I helped dig that spring, Henry declared, his deep voice steady. Watched Sean file papers myself. The land knows truth, even when men forget. Sneers and whispers hissed through the room. Indian talk, someone muttered. Who'd trust his kind? Zoe felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stood. Her hands trembled, but she clasped them tightly before her. The same faces that had mocked her at the widow's auction now turned to stare. I may be new to that land, she began, her voice soft but clear, but I've drawn water from that spring every day since I arrived. I've watched Sean work it honest, seen Henry speak true. She lifted her chin. That water gives life to more than cattle. It gives life to a home. Our home. The preacher rose from his seat near the back, his Bible clutched in weathered hands. Friends, he called out, I've known Sean Reddick 15 years. Truth isn't always written on paper. Sometimes it's written in the courage of those who stand for what's right. Gasps rippled through the hall. Kincaid surged to his feet, face flushing red. This is absurd, he sputtered. You can't possibly accept these stories over legal necessity. But something had shifted in the room. Townsfolk who had sat silent now leaned together, whispering with different tones. Eyes that had held scorn now showed doubt, then sympathy. Zoe stood straight and tall, feeling Sean's strength beside her, Henry's dignity behind her. Together they faced the crowd, waiting for judgment, bound by something stronger than paper. Truth spoken in love. Kincaid's face twisted with desperation. He strode to the judge's bench, pulling out a leather wallet thick with bills. Your Honor, he announced loudly, perhaps a private consultation would help clarify matters. Say, $500 worth of clarity. The hall erupted. Farmers leaped to their feet, shouting in outrage. Old Jim Wheeler, whose corn depended on creek water, pushed forward. "If they can steal Reddick's water," he bellowed, "they'll come for ours next." More voices joined in. "We all need water. Can't let money rule everything. Listen to the preacher." Judge's face darkened as he glared at Kincaid. He raised his gavel, bringing it down with 3 sharp cracks that echoed through the hall. "Order," he commanded. "Mr. Kincaid, you have just attempted to bribe this court in full view of witnesses. That alone tells me all I need to know about your character and claims." The banker stumbled backward, his confidence crumbling as townspeople pressed closer. By the testimony of Sean Reddick, Henry Yazzie, and Zoe Harlan, supported by character. Witness from Reverend Matthews and the clear objection of this community. I hereby declare the spring and its water rights belong to the Reddick Ranch. Furthermore, Mr. Kincaid, you will present yourself to the sheriff regarding this attempted bribery. Tears streamed down Zoe's cheeks as Sean's strong fingers wrapped around hers. Henry bowed his head, shoulders relaxing with relief. The railroad? Agent gathered his papers and slipped away while Kincaid stood frozen, his face ashen as people filed out of the hall. Many paused near Zoe. Martha Wheeler, the farmer's wife, embraced her warmly. "You showed real backbone, standing up like that," she said. "We need more folk willing to speak truth." Other women gathered around, offering smiles and kind words. Sarah from the Mercantile pressed Zoe's hand. "Come by the store soon. We're having a quilting circle Thursday." The same faces that had jeered at her auction now showed respect, even admiration. Zoe felt something heal deep inside her heart. That evening, lamplight glowed from the ranch house windows as savory smells filled the kitchen. Henry sat at their table while Zoe pulled fresh bread from the oven, its golden crust crackling. Oshana watched her move about the kitchen, grace in every step. Under the table, his hand found hers, squeezing gently. Zoe squeezed back, her heart full. This was home, not just the house or land, but the love and trust they had built together. Autumn painted the foothills in gold and crimson as peace settled over the Reddick Ranch. Weeks flowed by like the steady spring water that had caused such strife. The garden Zoe planted burst with life, rows of corn standing tall, pumpkins dotting the earth, and herbs releasing their sweet fragrance in the evening air. Sean worked steadily, his hammer ringing against fence posts as he mended corrals. The sound mixed with the lowing of cattle and the gentle whisper of wind through prairie grass. Henry rode over most days, sometimes staying to help move stock or mend tack. His quiet presence as natural as breathing. Laughter echoed where silence once ruled. The house transformed from an empty shell into a home filled with warmth and life. One evening, golden sunlight slanted through windows as Zoe pulled a crusty loaf from the oven. Sean leaned in the doorway, a soft smile playing across his weathered face as he watched her. The lamplight cast everything in honey-warm hues, reflecting off the polished table and gleaming tin cups. Later, they sat together on the porch, watching purple shadows creep across the land. Sean's calloused hand found Zoe's, holding it tight. "They mocked you once," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "But I see the truth now. You were God's answer all along." Tears welled in Zoe's eyes, but her heart soared with joy. As if completing their circle, Henry approached through the gathering dusk. His face bright with news, his family had been found safe, sheltering with cousins far north. Together, they settled on the porch steps, watching stars pierce the darkening sky. No longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but family bound by love, faith, and trust. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.